Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei episode review where I'll be going over the anime, manga, and light novel, discussing everything that the anime covered and what the anime skipped from the manga and the light novel. And today is a big one because we are dealing with the first ever turning point. So let's just jump into this with episode 8, Turning Point 1. So we start off with a glorious shot of Rudius holding up one of his hairs from, doesn't matter. But he says that he didn't like learning other languages like English back in his old life, but he enjoys learning the new ones of this new world. But we then see Eris and Ghislaine training, and Eris has improved quite a bit. But Rudius says that it's been 2 years since she turned 10, and in the intro we see that it's all raining and stuff as Eris prepares with a maid for something. We don't know what she's preparing, but this means that we're likely in the spring of K417. However, Rudius does say that Eris is already an advanced tier sword-style swordswoman, and so that's pretty impressive. But he also does note that the orb in the sky has gotten bigger for some reason, so that's a little concerning. But Eris hopes that for whatever they're planning, that Rudius would cry and jump for joy, but the maid reminds her that this is Rudius they're talking about, so he probably won't show much emotion. But Eris goes like, well, he'll like it, right? But Eris says that she wished that Rudius was born into a different family so that they could host a bigger party for him, but they know that they have to be secretive about it for political reasons. And Rudius had recently learned Paul's full name, Paul Nodos Greyrat, and we get a nice shot of the main 4 family branches' emblems. And so the head of the Nodos Greyrat family is Paul's brother, Paimon, who's apparently even more scummier than Paul, and once we eventually meet him, yeah, checks out. Well, we cut to Rudius and Ghislaine sitting in a room together as a bunch of maids are running around outside. Ghislaine congratulates Rudius on learning 3 languages in just 2 years. We obviously know that 2 of them are the Beast God tongue and the Demon God tongue. However, it's not exactly known what the 3rd language he studied was, but thanks to my omniscient-like knowledge, we know that it is the Fighting God tongue. And so you might be thinking, just what exactly is, like, the Fighting God tongue? Like, do you speak with your fists or what? But basically, humans on the Central and Millis continent speak the human tongue, when the humans on the Greyrat continent speak the Fighting God tongue. But anyway, Rudius knows what they're planning, and says that he wants to get a snack for he and Ghislaine, and starts to walk out of the room. But obviously, because they're planning for his birthday, Ghislaine's on duty to keep Rudius in his room. And so she kind of freaks out and tells him, to stay put, but then Rudius takes this opportunity to show Ghislaine the figure that he made of her, and she noticed that it's missing a tail, and that's because Rudius has never gotten close enough to her to be able to capture the details. And so she, with zero hesitation, just pulls down her pants in front of Rudius to present her tail, to Rudius. And then Rudius starts, poking it and touching her stone-hard ass and knocks on it. And as he's touching the butt, a maid walks in to say that the dinner is ready. But with everybody waiting in the dining hall, they all say, "Happy 10th birthday, Rudius," as Eris gives him some flowers. Rudius, acting surprised, pretends to cry and says that he's never thought that he'd ever be able to have a party like this. Soros then cries as well and says that he'll start a war with the Nodos Greyrat for making Rudius feel this way. He'll kill Paimon and put Rudius in charge. He then gets dragged out of the room for causing a ruckus. But Eris says that she has a surprise for him and tells him to take a guess at what it is, to which Rudius asks if his parents are coming, but she denies that because there's an unusual amount of monsters popping up in the Fidoa region. But with this, the room kind of fills with sadness, and suddenly Hilda then runs over to Rudius for a hug, smothering him in her large personalities. She then tells him that he is a part of the family and that she'll adopt him. No, she'll let her marry Eris. That's it. She asks Eris if Rudius isn't good enough for her, and Eris is like, "What? No, it's not that. It's just I'm only 10. What do you mean?" But she didn't deny that Rudius wasn't enough for her, but the 2 of them start to argue before, like Soros, Hilda is also dragged out of the room. But Eris, moving on from that, gives Rudius the surprise, and it's Aqua Hardia. It's a very valuable staff that's crafted from materials all over the world, and she found that it was weird that as powerful a magician as Rudius was, he didn't even have a staff yet. And so she got it made for him. Rudius says that it must have been super valuable and is thankful for Eris, but Eris says that the price didn't matter, and she tells everybody to let the party begin. And what's kind of cute is that Eris is blushing the whole time, and it seems like that she's more excited than the party than Rudius is. But then Rudius finally got a piece of that cake. Quite literally, it's been over 10 years, I think, and Rudius finally got a birthday cake, which is awesome. I've said it before that I don't think I could live in a world without rice, but also I don't think I could live in a world without cake. God damn. Both kinds of cake. But we get shots of him conversing with many of the family members as we cut to after the party had ended. But Philip, possibly drunk, explains the situation about Eris's older and younger brother, which we've already explained last time when the light novels covered it. But basically, all the men in the Boreas bloodline are raised in the head of the family's household. And since Philip lost the battle against his brother, any son that Philip has is going to be raised in his brother household instead. And so that's why Hilda was cold to Rudius for a while. But in the anime, and especially in the manga, Philip acts pretty sus, and we finally find out why. Philip reveals that he wants Rudius to marry Eris and lead the Boreas family in replacement of his brother. He basically wants to start a coup, and he's even willing to have Eris, his own daughter, tied in bed just so Rudius can have his way with her. And Rudius obviously rejects the offer, but then immediately realizes that he could have just created a harem like Philip did, and immediately regrets his decision, but it's too late now. But Rudius then enters his room and finds Eris sitting on his bed in white lingerie and says that she'd figure that he'd be lonely and that she would sleep with him tonight. But Rudius takes this opportunity and pushes her down on his bed and moving his hands around to a certain area before he tells her to stop. Rudius realizes that this is just what Philip wants, and so he restrains himself. But sitting on the bed, he says that if she stays here, he'll probably do something bad to her, to which she says that it's fine if it's only a little bit. Rudius then scooches closer to her and rests his shoulder on hers and finds that she's trembling. Rudius kisses her on the cheek and tries to take things to the next level before getting slapped and stomped to the ground. Storming out of the room, Rudius regrets his decisions, but then sees Eris standing at the doorway. Because it's his birthday, she says that she'll forgive him and that in 5 years, when he's 15 and she's 17, or in K422, he'll let her, they'll do some stuff together. And so we'll see K422. Will that happen? Who knows? But Rudius is super excited, but then he remembers about Sylphie, and so now he's got some pretty conflicted emotions. Well, we cut to Paul, Laws, and a bunch of other warriors fighting off dozens of monsters. These reports of monsters are popping up all over the Fidoa region, and Paul just wished that he could have seen his son for his birthday. But we see Sylphie arrive at the Greyrat's house as Norn, who shyly hides behind her mother Zenith, as inside Lilia is teaching Aisha how to clean properly. But Sylphie talks to Lilia and asks if she can deliver Rudius a pendant that she made, which is based off of one that her father owns. Lilia says that she'll deliver it to him as well as his holy relic. Lilia and Xena talk about how much Sylphie has cheered up and says that she doesn't get bullied as much anymore despite looking like a Superd. Norn then asks what a Superd is, and Xena says that it's a terrible, scary monster that will eat her. Norn then breaks down and cries, and Paul says that he has no idea why the monsters are popping up so much lately, but notices a dark reddish-bluish cloud off in the distance. We then cut to Roxy as she also notices the same cloud in the direction of the Asura Kingdom, which is also in the same direction as Buena Village, Roa, and the Fidoa region in general. But then we cut to somewhere in the Red Dragon mountain range as we see a man wearing white with white hair with little scales on his face as he walks alone. And a red dragon flies over to him and blasts him with fire. And if you notice, under where he stands, it didn't even get burnt. So he kind of just stopped the fire from hitting him and around him entirely. But then the dragon drops down and roars in his face, and the man's presence and stare alone is enough to instill fear into the dragon as it runs away. The man notices a large group of mana forming somewhere. He says that something has gone wrong, but what and where? He'll find out when he gets there, however, so he's not really too concerned about the whole situation for some reason. But then we see the great emperor of the demon world, Kishirika Kishirisu, looking at the mana, but she can't even tell where it's coming from with her demonic eye. Yelling at her people, she tells them to head into the direction, but then we find out that she's actually alone. And she kind of just chokes on the wind or something, and I don't know, it's honestly kind of sad when you think about it. She's commanding all these people, but she's actually just alone. There's a lot of depressing characters in Mushoku Tensei. But then cutting to Perugius' castle, Chaos Breaker, as it flies above the orb. Someone notes that the mana resembles the light of summoning, and they think that someone could be looking to undo the seal of Laplace. Perugius then summons Arumanfi as he teleports with a shine of light in front of him. Perugius tells him to investigate the mana and to kill any suspicious person on sight. Arumanfi then teleports away. And now it's the day after Rudius's 10th birthday as he, Eris, and Ghislaine are walking into a field because they want to see Rudius's most powerful spell, Cumulonimbus. And so without even trying, Rudius is able to cast a gigantic water ball, all thanks to the power of the magic staff, Aquahardia. But as Rudius starts to chant the incantation, a bunch of clouds start forming around the orb like what we've been seeing from the other people's perspectives. Ghislaine flips up her eye patch to reveal that she, like Kishirika, has a demon eye. With it, she can see the flow of mana and says that they need to get away from the orb immediately. And as she says that, a ray of light comes down as Ghislaine begins fighting with someone who moves like so fast that they can barely even see them. With a pause, we find out that it's Arumanfi the Radiant. He's here upon Perugius' orders. Ghislaine says that she is a sword king and the student of the sword god Galfarion. She swears on her master and on her tribe that she has nothing to do with the orb. Arumanfi, believing her, allows them to leave. But if they cause suspicion again, he will come back for them. And next time, he won't hesitate. But then, out of nowhere, the orb in the sky implodes into a burst of mana as a beam of light crashes down from the heavens and hits the earth. Arumanfi teleports away before it can reach him as Ghislaine tries to run for Rudius and Eris, but she gets covered in the blinding light, and Rudy and Eris hold each other as the light consumes the both of them. And then the episode ends. And I've got to say, like, this is super badass for Mushoku Tensei to do something like this in episode 8. Like, this isn't the middle of the season, it's not the end of it. Nah, it just happens randomly within the season, and it's so unexpected, it's so out of nowhere, but it works so well. But that is turning point 1. And now let's move on to the manga, which has a lot of new content that we don't actually see in the anime, so you better stick around. So before we get to the main contents of the chapter, I want to go over a little Roxy interlude chapter that the manga shows. In it, this mysterious troubadour woman sings a tale about a girl who fell in love with love. We cut back about 4 to 5 years ago, meaning that this is just before Roxy was hired by the Greyrat to teach Rudius. A party then approaches Roxy looking for an E-rank adventurer, but Roxy says that she can't because she's an A-rank adventurer. It's against the rules for a party to join up with someone that is more than 1 rank's difference. For reference, the ranks are F, E, D, C, B, A, and S. But the troubadour calls out to Roxy, who apparently follows her often. We cut to a party who are in the middle of a large monster fight, and the members are Pamela, the sub-tank, B rank, Dawn, tank, B rank, and Sam, attacker, A rank. Pamela uses her shield to strike some kind of lizard doggo from the air as Dawn protects her from a large regular looking lizard from behind. While Pamela and Dawn make sure each other is alright, Sam shoots 3 large monkeys that charge towards them. However, he ends up missing one of them, and that is when Roxy fires a fireball to save them. While exploring this labyrinth, she ran into this newly formed party, Triad, and she became a temporary member of the party. But despite Roxy, like the water mage, being there, Sam goes to fetch some water as Pamela joins him. Dawn says that the two are close, and despite his feelings for Pamela, he just wants her to be happy. How kind of him. But the reality of the situation is that Triad is no ordinary party. It is a love triangle. But that night, Sam asks Roxy to permanently join their party and starts to make a move on her despite Pamela, who's clearly into him. But then suddenly a Deathclaw tiger, a monster that is strong enough to wipe out even S-rank parties, shows up. And so Sam takes Roxy's hand and runs away with her, leaving the sleeping Pamela and Dawn for bait. Just as the tiger makes a move for Pamela, Dawn jumps in and takes the attack himself. Despite having like half of his organs probably destroyed, he still asks Pamela if she's okay. And in the struggle of Sam trying to pull Roxy away, she gets free and says that despite the strength of a Deathclaw tiger, they do have a weak point on their chest, their core. Roxy uses Ice Pillar that spears it in the chest, killing the monster instantly. And then running over to Dawn, she heals him and then walks over to Sam. She slaps him across the face and calls him out for trying to leave the others for bait and tells Pamela to not fall in love with guys like him, and that Dawn is like, fall in love with Dawn. He's a good guy. He's a nice guy, but like an actual nice guy, not a nice guy, right? Sam is a nice guy. But Roxy says that she will absolutely not join Triad and marches off, and then she trips and falls. She gets up, brushes off the dirt on herself, and continues off. But we cut to the present as the troubadour finishes her song, and then Pamela walks up to her with groceries in hand and a dog in tow. She says that ever since that incident, Triad had broke up, and eventually she and Dawn quit adventuring altogether and got married and had settled down in Roa. Pamela's glad to have listened to Roxy's advice and said that it was like a message from the gods. And both she and the troubadour say that it's like they were face to face with God, and it was white. Pure blissful white. But we cut to a Superd who's cutting down a tree and just killing it instantly, and wonders where he and someone else is. And yeah, the little Roxy interlude story is over, so back to the main event. But we cut to Rudius giving Ghislaine some appropriate and some kind of inappropriate compliments to Ghislaine in the beast god tongue. And she says that she has no idea what he's talking about, but hey, he knows how to speak the language well. But Rudius then starts to praise Roxy because he's also been able to learn the demon god tongue pretty well as well. But then his stomach starts to rumble. Ghislaine starts to freak out because he's going to go out and get a snack, and that's when Rudius realizes that she's trying to keep him inside of the room. She asks Rudius if he can show her a Saint tier level magic, and Rudius says that he can. He can conjure spells that could even sink the entire city of Roa if he wanted to, and he can show her, but they'd have to go a couple hours out of town, and says that if they wanted to make it, they'd have to leave now. Ghislaine then freaks out a little bit more before a maid comes in to tell them that dinner is ready. Rudius is surprised over his 10th birthday party, and Eris wears the dress that she does on the cover of the light novel. Hooray, look at that horrible blurriness. I'm just going to throw an image over top of it anyway. Why do I show you the physical book? There's something called editing. Let the editor deal with this. But anyway, Rudius starts to do a fake cry with the help of his water magic. But then the party starts to go quiet and Eris kind of freaks out a bit. But in response, he aborts his mission and runs over to Eris and hugs her, thanking her for the party. Soros freaks out, and instead of being dragged out like he is in the anime, Philip snaps his fingers as a bunch of cat maids seduce him and calm him down. Such power. Just... that's it. That's all you have to do. God damn it, I need to be born into a noble family. But they bring Soros over to the alcohol because of course they do. But we find out that Paul was actually disinherited by the family head, Paul's brother. Paimon, his brother, thinks that Paul is trying to use Rudius and the power of the Boreas family to take over the head of the Nodos family. And that's why Rudius' identity has to be remained a secret. And after Hilda freaks out and gets pulled over to where her father is, Philip notes that Rudius is quite the tactician and saw right through his facades. But then Eris takes Rudius' hand and continues the party as we get a montage of the events. But then the scene where Eris and Rudius are in his room goes pretty similarly, except Eris is wearing a black lingerie instead of a white one. But where he initially suspected her parents to set her up to do this, Rudius then realizes that Eris truly does care about him and was thinking about him and his feelings the entire time. And so it might have actually been her who wanted to spend the night with him, and he acted selfishly and went too far. But then he announces that he's never going to molest lollies again and that he is a changed man. But then we see the two statues in the background, one of Roxy standing up and one of Sylphie knocked over, which, symbolizing stuff, you know? Pretty crazy. But then the next day, Rudius is ready to head out to show Ghislaine his most powerful spell like he said he would. Ghislaine, however, brought along Eris, and the two acted pretty awkwardly with each other, Eris and Rudius, before they enter the carriage. But Rudius finally notices the red orb in the sky. Remember, he didn't notice it until now, in the manga anyway. He asks Ghislaine about it, but she says that it showed up just 5 years ago for whatever reason. But traveling across town, many people wave and give a quick word to Rudius as he passes by. Ghislaine goes on to say how impressed she is with Rudius and how much he's improved all of their lives ever since he's come here. Maturing and teaching Eris, educating Ghislaine to such a degree, and winning over the people of the city, all in just 3 years. It's kind of like what Roxy did in a way. But all while she says this, Eris is getting more and more impatient and somewhat angry, and by the end, she says, yeah, no, that's exactly what I was gonna say. But then we cut to Sharon and see that Pax, the 7th prince, had found the letters that Rudius has been sending to Roxy, and says that he'll assassinate him if she doesn't become his lover. Roxy says yeah, no, sure, I mean, you can go for it. I mean, you could try, I guess, you know. But then she notices the sky in the direction of the Asura kingdom is quite strange, and she notes that it looks like summoning magic. Cutting back to Rudius, Eris, and Ghislaine, Rudius casts a simple water ball that's about 3 to 4 times as big as it normally is. And just then, the strange clouds form above Roa where the orb was, and Ghislaine says that it's best to go home, or even just, better yet, just leave town altogether. And just then, in a flash of light, Automanfi shows up with a knife to Rudius's throat. He accuses Rudius of the one being responsible for this magic, but then Ghislaine charges forward and hits Automanfi with her secret technique, Sword of Light, and misses. The light speed attack that Ghislaine used didn't hit him. Automanfi's fast. He's really fast. But their conversation goes pretty similarly, and then the orb starts to crack and shatter just as Rudius asks Automanfi a question. And just then, the light strikes the ground, and we cut to Paul holding Norn, Lilia guiding Aisha's hand to clean the table, and Philip and Hilda sitting together, Soros with a maid, and Sylphie's alone looking up at a blinding light. The light then consumes the entire city of Roa, destroying everything in its path, and just after it consumes Ghislaine, Automanfi teleports away as Rudius shields Eris, having it engulf them both along with the entire Fidoa region. There is nothing left remaining. All while this happens, we see a man hunched over in a void of darkness, with light trickling out from within him. Something catches his eye, and he looks. And so that's the main part of the manga, but before we continue off to the light novel, there is still a bit more to go through. At the end of Volume 3, we get a short story all about Zenith, sometime after Rudius had been kicked out of the house. But the story starts off with Zenith introducing herself, saying that she's a mother of two as she makes Norn and Aisha crawl towards her. But she then notes that one of these two kids isn't hers. Her other one is sent off to go to someplace, and these two girls are what you would call half-sisters. Two different mothers, one father. But Aisha, being the exceptional child that she is easily able to make it to Zenith's arms. However, upon seeing this, Norn goes like, "Ugh." This all happens while Aisha's like trapped under Zenith's breasts. But then Zenith goes, "Oh, don't worry, I'm still here waiting." And then soon Norn makes her way to Zenith with tears in her eyes. But then suddenly Lilia shows up, picks up Aisha and shakes her, yelling at her going, "How dare you make it first before Norn? Know your place, child!" She's a great mother, let me tell you that. But soon after this, the girls are getting tired, and so Lilia and Zenith decide to head to bed. And Paul's like, "Hey, I think I'm ready for bed too." But without anybody even listening to them, he was destined for another night alone by himself. Zenith explains that while she was pregnant, Paul went behind her back and got Lilia, their maid, pregnant. And that's why they're currently living apart in the same house. Zenith says that she is a believer in the Millis faith and promotes that its followers to be clean and morally sound and to practice monogamy. Lilia and Paul don't practice Millis's faith, and, fair enough, but she still felt obviously betrayed. Two closest people in Zenith's life went behind her back and did something like that. Crying, Zenith says that she can absolutely never forgive him. But it's Rudy that opened up the chance for her to forgive him. Rudy assessed the situation and acted accordingly, and in the end, he was worried about his family being torn apart. Zenith forgave Paul because of Rudy, and it was all because of the sake of her children. She started to feel sad for Rudy, who all he wanted to do is see his sisters grow up and see their adorable faces as they sleep, like Zenith is looking at Norn right now. And then she realizes that it must also suck not being able to see that face even though you're in the same house. And then, right on cue, Paul starts banging on the door, calling Zenith, he calls out for her, calling her mommy, as he wants to sleep with her tonight because he's been so lonely. But Zenith goes like, "Oh, if you're so lonely, why don't you go sleep with Lilia then?" But Paul explains that it was only because she was pregnant and he couldn't help himself. And he promised that he would never do it again, but Zenith reminds him that he never keeps his promises. But just then, Paul thought of something. It's for Rudy. They have to make up, because what happens when Rudius comes back and just finds his family just a complete mess? You can't do that to Rudius. No, poor little Rudius. But just then, Zenith opens the door and tells him to be quiet because Norn is sleeping. Paul jumps up, saying "Mommy," and hugs Zenith before realizing literally what she just said and needs to shut up. But Zenith nuzzles her head into his chest and says that it isn't fair what they're doing, using their children as excuses. And Paul's like, "Yeah, fair. But what he said before, it won't happen again." The two are about to kiss, but then Norn starts freaking the hell out, and Zenith pushes Paul away to run towards her daughter, and Paul's about to dip out of the room before Zenith's like, "What? Where are you going? Help me change her. You're the father, aren't you?" And so with a huge grin on his face, Paul runs over to help change Norn. Zenith closes off her monologue by saying, "I'm Zenith Greyrat. Right now, I'm really enjoying being a mother. So what a nice kind of bittersweet little side story to see like Zenith's point of view of the whole situation. So things aren't looking too well for them, but I mean, Norn is still like a tiny little baby, so this must have been like really soon after Rudius left. I'm sure they're doing fine now. So a lot of new stuff, a lot of, Roxy, Zenith stuff, and just generally a little bit more information on the scenes that we were already given. So with that, let's move on to the light novel. With this chapter, we jump about 3 to 4 months in the future as Rudius has finally turned 10, meaning that we are in the spring of K417. Rudius says that in the past 2 years, he's learned the Beast God Tongue, Demon God Tongue, and Fighting God Tongue, which is quite similar to the Human God Tongue. He compares it to like English to German, essentially. The basic grammar was the same, but the only differences were the expressions and vocabulary. And learning multiple languages in this world was much easier in this world than it was to the other one, since many of these new languages use certain basic rules that are common between each other. And so there were no book or really people that he could go to learn the Sky God Tongue or the Sea God Tongue, but Rudy says that 4 languages plus Japanese is enough. And in terms of sword fighting, he's almost at the intermediate tier, while Eris is well into the advanced tier. And so the gap in skill is pretty big now. Apparently in the month leading up to his birthday as well, the maids, and especially Eris, were growing restless. He thought that it was because Eris was going to get a fiancé or something, but after doing some investigating, he found out that it's because a birthday party that they were planning for him. In his bedroom, where Ghislaine is stalling Rudius, he shows her figure that he's made of her, and she shows him her ass. Out of context, that sounds kind of strange, but she mentions that after seeing a portrait of Eris that someone had painted, she's always wanted to have something like this made in her image and is excited to see the final product. So that's nice and wholesome. But then the party starts, and as Rudius puts on some fake tears, Soros declares war on the Notos family. And Philip, despite how much he'd love to go to war on them, tells his father to calm down. Because today is for celebration, and plus they'd be making an enemy of Zephyros and Euros. And as previously mentioned, there are 4 family branches. Those 4 are the Notos Greyrats, Boreas Greyrats, the Zephyros Greyrats, and the Euros Greyrats. And as Eris talks about her surprise for Rudius, she puffs out her chest, to which the wise old hermit notes that she's finally wearing bras and that they'll certainly grow quite large when she's older. I'm realizing I don't need to go into like every bit of detail with this with the light novel. I say that every time, but I never learn my lesson. I'm a natural Rudius Greyrat. What can I say? But after Rudius guesses that his family might have showed up, Eris says that Paul couldn't join, and neither could Zenith or Lilia because both Norn and Aisha had fallen ill. Skipping past Hilda's outburst because it's basically the same, Eris gives Rudius the Aquahardia, which means Arrogant Water Dragon King, and Rudius explains that the magic crystals and his wands for Eris and Ghislaine only costed like a silver coin each. And so looking at the size of this crystal and the quality of the wood on Aquahardia, he knows it was expensive. And we get an exposition dump on how wands and staffs quality are determined and what Aquahardia is made of. So instead of just trying to reword it like I normally do with all this stuff, I'm just going to straight up read it from the book. The rank of a staff was determined by the wood and its magic crystal. Each type of magic had a certain affinity with different types of wood. Fire and earth spells matched best with persimmon wood, while water and wind matched best with pagoda wood. But even if the affinities didn't match, it didn't mean that the power of the spell was diminished. The important thing wasn't the wood, but the magic crystal. Channeling magic through the crystal increased the potency of a spell. There were many grades of crystal, but the larger and more transparent, the more effective it was. A crystal's price increased astronomically with its effectiveness. The crystals Rudius used to make Eris and Ghislaine's wands were worth a silver coin apiece. There were cheaper ones, but he had remembered the approximate size of the one that Rudy gave him and selected something similar. They were about as big as the tip of his pinky, and this one was as big as his fist and was easily worth over 100 gold coins, especially with its ultramarine hue. A crystal with color to it greatly increased the potency of its magic. The magic-imbued crystals found in labyrinths didn't have any amplifying effects. Instead, they carried magic power of their own, so they were either used in magical items or used to supplement a person's mana cost when using a powerful spell. Alphonse explains that the wood from this cane comes from the branch of a living elder treant in the eastern part of the Great Forest on the Millis continent. It's said that an elder treant is a higher subspecies of the lesser treant, born from the nourishment of the fairy spring. It's an A-rank magical creature that can manipulate water magic. The crystal comes from the northern part of the Beggarid continent from a wayward sea dragon, another A-rank item. The crafter is Shien Procyon, the greatest staff craftsman, the rod director in the Asuran Royal Palace's Mage Guild. The staff is tailor-made for water magic, just like Rudius. Contrary to its appearance, it's quite lightweight. Rudius took it in both hands and swung it around. It was easy to lift and flip. Despite the large crystal at its tip, it was well balanced. No surprise there, given how expensive it was. After that, Rudius thanked Eris for the gift and they started the party. Apparently the food, other than Eris's horrendously cooked dishes, were delicious. At first, Eris couldn't stop talking about the preparation of the party, the cooks, and the maids. However, as time went on, she slowed down her talking and eventually nodded to sleep. And after that, Ghislaine carried Eris off to her bedroom. Rudius had found out that on Eris's 10th birthday that the Asura kingdom had many different forms of alcohol, mostly being made from wheat. However, wine from grapes would be prepared for special occasions. But now that the party is over, we get the conversation between Rudius and Philip in a lot more detail. Soros had 10 sons, however only 3 of them went on to be important. These would be Philip, Gordon, and James. There was a fight amongst the 3 to become the head of the family, and James manipulated Gordon and a daughter of the Euros Greyrat family to fall in love with each other. Once Gordon married into that family, he was basically disqualified from becoming the head of the Boreas family, and so that left James and Philip left, and nothing really significant happened. Phil simply just lost. The 2 were pretty evenly matched, but because James was 6 years older, that's 6 more years of experience and fame, which gave him a nearly impossible edge. And from there, with Philip's 2 sons, they were taken by James and raised in his household to their tradition. This is so no rise of power can come from the losing family. And they had hoped that Eris was going to be able to turn things around, but with her tomboyish nature, she basically disqualified herself, and that's why they hired Ghislaine. But then Rudius showed up. Despite everything that Philip thinks of the whole situation, Rudius was able to change Eris, and so he hopes that Rudius one day ends up marrying Eris and overthrows James as the family head. Rudius doesn't really care for politics and leaves for bed. Waiting for Rudius in his room, Eris is found in red lingerie. It's different in all 3, would you look at that? The scene from here plays out pretty similar to how it does in the anime and manga, except it's just a little bit more intimate. So, am I going to go into more details? No. No, I will not. Maybe when they become adults, I'll indulge into these scenes a little bit more, but right now, I don't think so. After a very uncomfortable final paragraph of the chapter, which, if you'd like to read, it's page 243 and 244, I will leave you with the wise words from Rudius. Lolly good, touching bad. But now, moving on, we get the final Eris report. Name, Eris B. Greyrat. Occupation, granddaughter of Fidoa's liege lord. Personality, sometimes violent, sometimes meek, depending on the situation. Does listen properly. Reading and writing, almost perfect. Arithmetic, capable of doing division. Magic, can't do any spells without chanting them. Intermediate spells also a challenge. Fencing, sword god style, advanced tier. Etiquette, currently studying difficult imperial court etiquette. People she likes, grandfather and Ghislaine. Person she loves, Rudius. Now, isn't that just so sweet? She loves Rudius now, that's great. But moving on to the first turning point. Well, we cut to Roxy as she sees the clouds from her window that remind her of summoning magic. However, she points out that the clouds are eastward, and so I know that there are times where, like, when I read the book and write up my notes, I get confused by the specifics of the date and, like, some locations and whatever, which is why I go into excessive detail about them sometimes, just to, like, if I'm wrong, I want people to understand where I'm wrong and where to correct me, because I know people will correct me. But this one caught me off guard and made me realize something potentially interesting. It's either that this and a few other cases, east and west are being switched up, is a mistake. But because, let me just say, so if you didn't know, Shrone Kingdom is like southeast of the Fidoa region, like by a long shot. But she says that looking into the east, she can see the Fidoa region. No, she can't. If she looks east, she's looking at water. So either this time and like a few other times that this happens, west and east are getting switched up by accident and it's just a mistake, or west and east are actually backwards in this world. I mean, in a way, upon first glance, we have the east and west port, which east is on the left and west is on the right. And so initially that kind of makes you think like, oh, so east is in the left in this world. But when you think about it from the continent's perspective, the east port is on the eastern part of the central continent, and the west port is on the western side of the Millis continent. So in some cases it's correct, but in some cases it isn't. So I don't know what's going on. Is this really a mistake? Like, it happens so many times. Or is it legitimate? Or is it not a mistake and I'm just really fucking stupid? Because I think it might be that. Because I was losing my mind over this, because this would happen multiple times. They would say that, oh, eastward is this way, when, okay, well, I mean, it is in the way that I was pointing, yes, but like, you know, they say the eastward's this way, but it isn't. It's that way. And so it doesn't make sense. There's just some times where I don't know. I don't know. I think I'm just an idiot. But she says that she's looking east. East is water. East is not Fidoa. I don't know. Again, I could just be really dumb, but I wanted to talk about that. So, yeah. I hope you had fun hearing my little rant about that, because I don't know, am I losing my mind? Or is East and West actually switched up in this world? Because I think if it is, that's really cool. I think that's really cool. But I don't know if it's true. It might be a mistake, or whatever. I'm done. Moving on. According to Roxy, Rudeus had actually tried studying summoning magic to no avail, which is why she thought that this cloud could be his doing. Once Pax gropes Roxy, she recites a certain incantation. Raging flames consume my body, burn in place. She isn't able to do silent spellcasting like Rudeus, but she's shortened her spells quite a bit. And Pax, in response to this, says that he'll get Rudeus murdered if she doesn't become his lover. And during this conversation, we get a little bit more affirmation that Roxy is quite self-conscious about her body. And we actually get some info on how much power Pax really holds. Pax Sharon, the 7th prince of the Sharon kingdom, is quite low in terms of power, and Roxy actually outclasses him even. And in her contract, she really doesn't even have to listen to him and is allowed to punish him in any way she sees fit. Hence, the fire. But she says that there's nothing that Pax can do. Even if he does find Rudeus, which is unlikely since Asura is like 10 times the size of Sharon, he can't even bring his Imperial guards out there to kill him because they can't even cross the borders. And even if they could, Rudeus is protected by the Sword King Ghislaine. But Roxy heard about how awful Eris was at first, but now she's become quite mature in comparison. But then she looks over to see Pax to see that he hasn't matured even a little bit in the past like 5 years. Roxy says that she'll soon be quitting the position because Pax is now 15. He's reached maturity, and that is the end of their contract. She says that she'll start to head towards the strained clouds in the west. She said west.
I thought you said east.
Anyway, the truth is, even though she used the clouds as an excuse, she really just wanted to see Rudeus again. And after arguing with Pax, she packed her things and left. So according to the author, which technically is Rudeus if we're going by the canon, the clouds are so large and appeared so abruptly that just about everyone in the world took notice. In the Red Dragon Mountains, even the dragon god Orsted, the strongest being in this world, found it strange. He noted that the large amount of mana pooling in the western sky, which means that he's either currently in the Red Dragon range's upper jaw or near the Red Dragon's hole. And he's so strong that he's able to kill a red dragon in an instant. Red dragons are one of the most feared monsters in the central continent. And yes, they are powerful, but as powerful as they are also just as smart. But anyway, Orsted then makes his way down the mountain in the direction of Fidoa. We cut to Perugius' floating castle, Chaos Breaker, as the armored dragon Perugius, one of the 3 legendary heroes, looks down at the northern sky. He says that the light is similar to when the great emperor of the demon world, presumably Kishiriku, is revived. And standing nearby, a skyfolk woman with large black wings and a white crow's mask notes that the mana feels different. It feels like a summoning. However, what's unusual is the amount of mana and light that's there. The only thing that they could compare it to is when they made Chaos Breaker, the literal floating castle, so this is big. But the day was described as one just like any other. Perugius sat on his throne surrounded by his 12 followers as he monitored the lands, all in wait for the revival of the demon god Laplace, his greatest enemy who he will kill to avenge his 4 fallen comrades. They all suspect that it's Kishiriku causing this because she's been awfully quiet in the past 300 years. Perugius thinks that she could be trying to revive Laplace, and so summoning Automanfi, he sends him to deal with any suspicious people that could be causing this. But then we cut to the sword god Galfarion as he looks up at the southern sky. He sits, wondering about that while his 2 pupils attempt to get a jump on him, but he tells them off. He says that they've grown overconfident just because they're now sword emperors and they've grown pathetic. He says that fame and money can only get you so far and true power lies in strength. Ghislaine knew it best, but she had grown soft. settling for Sword King. What makes someone strong is their greed and selfishness, the desire to get stronger. That is where Ghislaine fell off, and that's where these two peoples shine. He tells the two peoples to kill him and then to kill the other one, so one of the other two can become the sword god. If they do, they'd have money to last 100 lifetimes and they could have any woman that they want, but they find that to be insulting because that's not why they learned the sword. However, Gal thinks that they have to be more honest with themselves, and if they did, they'd already have overcame him. And at this point, Gal had already forgotten about the southern sky. But now somewhere in the demon continent, we cut to the great emperor of the demon world, Kishirika Kishirisu, as she looks up at the eastern sky. She then yells, "Humph! When you become as great as I am, you can see things even if you face in the opposite direction." She continues and asks, "How's that? Amazing, isn't it?" But there was no one there. Not a single person was present. She goes, "Huh, so you're ignoring me. Ha ha ha. Very well, very well. I'll forgive you humans. Or rather, no one will come near me because of the peace treaty, so I'll have no choice but to forgive you." And yeah, Kishirika was lonely. She's a really lonely person. I feel so bad for her. She's so innocent. Although she's probably done some horrendously horrible things in the past, but I don't care. We get a little bit of backstory on Kishirika, and I guess once she was revived, no one had even come to see her. And so she went to the city where people just told her to scram. And so she went to see some old friends, all of which told her to behave herself. Disappointed, she kicked a stone and noticed the western sky. Another name that Kishirika goes by was the Demon Emperor of Demon Eyes, because she possessed more than 10 of them, and in a single glance, no matter how far away, she could see what was happening. With her eyes, she can see the mana, what's happening, and who's controlling it. At least, she should have been able to. But for some reason, she can't see what's going on with this collection of mana in the Fidoa region. She isn't all-knowing, hence why she's not the demon god, but she's still quite powerful. She thinks to herself that it would be nice if a hero could be summoned so that she can have a rival. However, everybody is always like, Laplace this and Laplace that. Oh, Kishirika? Who's that? And so she sighed as she set out on her journey, a journey with no particular destination in mind. Honestly, only second to like Zenith and a certain old man. Kishirika is probably one of the most like depressing characters in the series. Just, I don't know, it just feels so sad. She's so lonely. But after that, we cut back to Rudius, Eris, and Ghislaine on the hill on the outskirts of the Citadel of Roa. And from there, Rudius spends like half an hour trying to get a hang of Aquahardia and figures out that it's 5 times as strong. So for example, without the staff, he could produce a spell that costs 10 mana and dealt 5 damage. Now he can produce the same 10 mana spell, but now do 25 damage. And this means that he can now, with the staff, only use 2 mana to cast a spell that did 5 damage, essentially increasing his mana capacity or power output, whichever way you want to look at it. But testing out other magic, he found out that fire was amplified by 2-fold and wind and earth were by 3-fold, and combining magic was much more difficult, likely due to the different amplification of their power. And once Rudius notices the clouds and Ghislaine's notice the mana, Automanfi shows up and deals with Ghislaine, being able to dodge her long sword of light technique, which Rudius goes on to describe that it does in fact allow the tip of the sword to move at the speed of light if you perfected it. But Ghislaine explained that this is what makes the Sword God style stronger than the other 2 styles. But then Automanfi uses Krillin's Solar Flare technique to blind them, but Ghislaine moves her eye patch to the other eye and is able to counter all of his attacks. After that, he formally introduces himself as Automanfi the Bright under Perugius' orders. Recognizing the name, Rudius warns Ghislaine that he can move at the speed of light, meaning that Ghislaine probably mastered the Longsword of Light technique if she was able to cross blades with him. But Rudius also mentions that he can teleport anywhere that's within his line of sight, so he's quite the powerful opponent. Ghislaine then says that she's wielder of one of the 7 original Sword God's blades, Hiramune, Flat Core. And after that, Automanfi teleports away as the Fidoa region gets devoured in the light. And so normally this is where the review ends, but there's still a little bit more to go through. The epilogue. But 6 months after what is known as the teleportation incident, the monoclamity, displacement incident, or the metastasis event, it's got a lot of different names, Roxy finally reached the Fidoa region, only to find it reduced to nothing but a barren wasteland. Dropping to her knees, a driver came up from behind and asked if she lost anyone. She says that she had a magician apprentice who was only 10 that lived here. The driver did say that there is a refugee camp close by if she'd like to check it out. And once she arrived, she noted that the camp had many wooden buildings and was about the size of an entire village. Plenty of people were here, but none were in a good mood for obvious reasons. The Asura Kingdom was known as the wealthiest country in the world, and so seeing a sight like this was never even thought of. Normally there'd be people smiling and laughing all around, but there wasn't any of that here. Not a single smile to be found. Despite the abundance of food and people here, people were quite depressed, and she found that interesting since compared to the demon continent, they were kind of living good. And so she didn't really understand what was happening. But plenty of people were crying over their lost ones, cursing God, and even trying to kill themselves. She'd witnessed murder and death, even being close to it numerous times herself, but she had never seen sadness like this. After an hour, she got the gist of what happened. A beam of light struck the region and teleported everyone within it to a random place on the planet. The trees and buildings, among other objects, however, were merely destroyed. There was a bulletin board of those who were either dead or missing, and even the Fidoa's liege lord Soros was on there. But the board was filled with more requests than she'd ever seen before, and looking through the short list of deceased, she thankfully didn't recognize any of the names. However, she looked through the names of the missing, which was painfully long. Likely the majority of these people would wind up dead, killed by monsters never to be found again. She then stopped when she found names that she recognized: Rudius Greyrat, Zenith Greyrat, Lilia Greyrat, and Aisha Greyrat. Both Norn and Paul's names were crossed off of the list for whatever reason. Panicked, she looked through the list of deceased names again, only to find them not there, and so that meant that they were alive and found. Thinking about the situation, she should at least send a letter to her parents to let them know that she's okay. But as she thought that, she came across a letter from Paul meant for Rudius, and it read this: To Rudius, Zenith, Aisha, and Lilia are missing. Norn is safe and in my custody. I don't know where you are right now, but I'm sure that even if you're alone, you'll make it back here. So I'll search for you last. For now, I'm headed to the Millis continent. This is where Zenith was born and raised. I've sent a message to Lilia's hometown and house as well. I want you to search the northern part of the central continent. If you can find any of them, contact me with the info below. Zenith, Lilia, if either of you see this, please contact me as well. For anyone that might know me or my family or former members of the Fang of the Black Wolf, please help me search. I'm sure the members of Fangs of the Black Wolf may have mixed feelings about me. I won't ask you to sweep it under the rug. You can scream at me all you want. If you ask me to lick your boots, I'll do it. All my assets are gone, so I can't pay you, but please, help me search for my family. Contact information: Millis Continent, Holy Country of Millis' capital Militian, Adventurers Guild. Party name: Search Squadron for Buena Village Residents. Clan name: Roa Regions Search for Missing Persons Association. From Paul Greyrat. After confirming Paul's status, Roxy sighed a breath of relief and decided that she would help in Paul's search for the other Greyrats. However, since he's searching for Rudius last, she'd start with him. What a coincidence. She just wants to go see her students so often, and she's using any excuse at this point. But since Paul left for the holy country of Millis, he'd probably have left similar messages along the way. Likely in the Asura King's borders, the Dragon King Kingdom's eastern port, and the holy country of Millis' western port. This meant that she should search the northern part of the central continent, the Beggared continent, and the Demon continent. Because the Beggared and Demon continents would be most challenging, Roxy thought to start there, since she'd likely be able to find a strong party to help her in her search. She then made up her mind and decided to head for the Dragon King Kingdom's port and either make her way to the Demon continent from there or go to the Beggared continent. This was the start of Roxy Magurdia's long journey. And so there's actually quite a bit more to Volume 2, a whole side story dedicated to a certain muscular cat warrior and what she's been up to during the Displacement Incident. So let's go over that. Let me read to you the tale of the Forst Goddess. The year was K5XX, presumably around the year K520. This story is set in the conflict zone, a place where many small nations fought for supremacy and are locked in constant battles. One of these countries was the Markian mercenary country, named after its founder, the mercenary king Markian. Normally, most countries built in the conflict zone soon fall after their creation, only to be rebuilt and destroyed shortly after, and the cycle continues. However, the Markian mercenary country had survived for quite a while and was one of the strongest forces that fought within the conflict zone. It grew economically by dispatching mercenaries to neighboring countries. Markian supported all other nations equally without discrimination, and the mercenaries dispatched were incredibly feared. Their warriors were powerful, their commanders were calm and collected, and their tacticians excelled. If you saw them on the battlefield, you generally already knew who was going to win. In a bar located in Markien, a couple mercenaries were bragging about the scars and battles they've been in. One was in the battle that had been called the Defensive Battle of Rudomin, and received scars around his shoulder. At the time of the battle, the other mercenary was held up in Ars Fort, Eastern Gate, where he nearly lost his right arm. Both of them saw how fortunate it was that they made it out alive and attributed it to the grace of the Forst Goddess. One of the mercenaries grabbed a pendant from his breast pocket. It was a relief carved into the wood of a profile shot of a woman with animal-like ears. In response, the other mercenary unsheathed his sword at his side, which the blade was dyed red with paint. The two of them made a toast to the Forst Goddess, Laine. The Forst Goddess, called Laine, was the god of the Markien mercenaries, and according to legend, she was the goddess of salvation, who appeared about 100 years ago when the Markien mercenary country was on the verge of collapse. However, thanks to her, one of the commander-in-chief was able to rescue the country from disaster, and it's thanks to this event that many of the Markien mercenaries believed that when they were in the verge of death, the Forst Goddess would come and save them, which is why they prayed to her. They were actually the only country in the world that believed in the Forst Goddess Laine. So why is it just them? Well, we have to jump back about 100 years into the past to the year 417 of the Armored Dragon, or K417, the same year of the Displacement Incident. It was just under 2 years ago that the mercenary king Markien had founded his country and was currently on the verge of collapse. As I mentioned before, this wasn't really anything new to hear about within the conflict zone. They were just another casualty of the cycle of rebuilding and destruction. However, nothing happened without cause. Their economy was based around deploying mercenaries and possessed a military power beyond what is normal for a developing country. And that was the problem. Two neighboring countries, the Dikuto Kingdom and the Brose Empire, saw them as a threat, and when Markien showed weakness, they simultaneously declared war upon the country. No matter how strong the mercenary country was, it was powerless when faced against two nations. In the battle, they lost half of its territory after the sudden surrender of an important fortress and the loss of many large battles. At this rate, there was no future for the country. Land was taken, battles were lost, and many remaining mercenaries who saw that either fled or turned traitor. The decisive battle, which was thereafter known as the site of Markien's final battle, took place in a large basin. Up until this point, the Dikuto Kingdom and the Brose Empire had launched their attacks separately, but because the basin was surrounded by forests infested with monsters, it restricted their movements and they had to stick together. The basin was also a key point because when Markien fell, the two countries would have to control this point to seize power over the area around the capital. And from there, it was likely that the Dikuto Kingdom and the Brose Empire would clash themselves. Initially, Markien had tried to pin the two countries against each other, but with how small their military strength was reduced to, they had to simply focus on surviving. However, Bigot Mercenal, the captain of the 3rd unit of Markien's mercenary company, was given a risky plan from Markien. Bigot would lead 10 of his men to Ejin Forest, the forest that surrounds the basin. He and his 10 soldiers would be wearing the armor of the Brose Empire soldiers that they had killed and would perform a surprise attack on a certain camp of the Dikuto Kingdom. There's a few things to note regarding this plan of attack. Ejin Forest, for as long as people can remember, the ruler of the area has forbidden passage through it and woodcutters would even refuse to enter the forest. Even the soldiers of the Dikuto Kingdom and Brose Empire avoided it. Why? Well, the ruler of the area wasn't exactly human. They were a supposed terrifying monster that the locals feared, which resulted in anyone and everyone avoiding the forest at all costs. But not Bigot and his men. He and his men would break through the forest and perform a surprise attack on the Dikuto soldiers. However, they didn't have much manpower to spare. All they had with Bigot was 3 intermediate tier North God style swordsmen, and the other were just general foot soldiers. And Bigot himself was an advanced tier Sword God style swordsman. They didn't, however, have enough manpower to spare even a healer. Magicians were valuable assets to the parties, and this mission that Bigot was going on was a suicide mission. You can't waste a magician like that. And so why perform this mission if they were so tight on resources? Basically, although the Dikuto Kingdom and the Brose Empire were temporarily allies during this battle against Markien, tension ran high between the two nations and one small push could cause their alliance to snap and cause conflict between them. And that's where Bigot came in. Posing as Brose Empire soldiers, they'd attack the soldiers of the Dikuto Kingdom, making them think that it was Brose who was behind the attack. From there, it wouldn't be a 2v1, but rather a 1v1v1 between the 3 nations. Markien put Bigot in charge of the operation because he was known for being daring and resolute. The surprise attack plan was a very dangerous one and almost guaranteed death for everyone involved. Even if they succeeded, the men would likely take their own lives to avoid capture. There's no way that the Dikuto Kingdom can find out about their identities, otherwise the operation would crumble. They would have to die as traitors. Despite the guarantee of death, Bigot wasn't afraid. In fact, while talking with Markien, he compared himself to the legendary twin gods, Megas and Gumis, who were two of the legendary heroes from 400 years back that died in the Battle of Laplace. He saw this as a similar situation and would die with honor. But that, to Bigot, was strange that he'd even fight for honor. Bigot was born into a mercenary band and his father died before he was born, and his mother died not long after. He was then sold as a slave and was brought into the Markian mercenary company. It was there that he learned how to do battle, and ever since then he only ever lived for money and survival, never honor. It was known that the knights were the only ones who died for honor, and he was no knight. But then again, maybe he is one. A knight of Markien. He was proud to think of himself that way. For the longest time he never felt like he belonged anywhere, but he realized that the Markian mercenaries were his family. They were his home, and so he was ready to die to protect it. He always mocked ideals like that, but now that he was in a similar position, it didn't seem too bad after all. But Bigot and his men treaded through the forest for about an entire day now and only had 2 monster encounters. The first of which caught them off guard and had one of the men fall. The monster that attacked them was a wounded red leaf tiger, a fearsome B-ranked monster. To think, what could leave a monster like that in such a critical condition? Bigot thought that it was the monster that ruled the forest, the A-ranked monster, the Carantosaurus. It was a large dinosaur-like creature over 5 meters in length. The only thing he could think of that could hurt the red leaf tiger was that. And that meant, if the Carantosaurus returned, they'd surely be killed on the spot. So Bigot then decided to march on forward more cautiously than before. However, instead of running into the Carantosaurus, the band ran into something arguably more dangerous. A group of 10 Bros soldiers. The 2 groups fought, and even the strongest of Bigot's men were taken down in an instant. What they didn't know is that they were dealing with the Bros Emperor's personal bodyguards. The reason why they were out there in the forest with them is because, about an hour ago, the Bros Emperor was making his rounds at the nearby camps to boost morale, but then got jumped by a monster and was left with a scratch. Nothing too dangerous, but it lowered morale. And so the Emperor commanded his bodyguards to search for the hide of a ferocious beast and bring it back so he can claim that he had killed something strong to show that he wasn't weak. The captain of the Emperor's Guard introduced himself as Klein Dinoltas, Water Saint Klein. To Klein, Bigot and his men were just regular traders, and so this left Bigot a decision. Fight till his death in complete vain, or surrender and have the operation fail. Well, actually regardless, the operation would fail either way. And so really he just had to choose how he wanted to go out. But that's when it happened. A gigantic lizard came flying at them, the vivid green Carantosaurus. However, it was riddled with open wounds and blood pouring out of its mouth. It collapsed between the 2 groups. And just after that, a wild beast jumped in after it and pierced its head with its sword. After casually killing the A-ranked monster, it wasted no time and went for its next prey and cut down 2 of the Emperor's bodyguards. At first, Bigot thought that this must have been the ruler of the forest. But then he got a look at the creature, and it was no creature at all. It was a tanned, muscular cat-beast-folk woman who wielded a sword, the blade with a crimson-red color. In an instant, the woman aimed for its next target, Klein, and sliced him clean in half. Despite being a water saint, someone who should be able to block and repel any attack given to him, he was cut down by this woman who used the long sword of light, a secret sword god style technique. After Klein, the other intermediate water god and sword god Bros warriors died in a mere few seconds. Bigot and his men froze, unsure of what to do, and now the woman was looking their way. But that's just it. This wasn't just any monster. This was a woman. There's the story of his master, a sword saint. He was a just and honorable warrior of the sword god style who trained in the holy land of sword. He wouldn't tell Bigot why he became a mercenary, but he would talk about his experience back in the sword sanctum. He often talked about one of the other students who was violent, almost like a mad dog. She had surpassed him and became a sword king. Despite the violent tendencies, she wasn't a bad person, just an idiot. Everyone hated her because she'd lose control in extreme situations and go mad with bloodlust, attacking anyone, friend or foe. Bigot realized that this was the woman from his master's past. This was the Sword King, Lady Ghislaine de Doldia. Once Bigot said her name, Ghislaine soon came to reason. Ignoring anything else that came out of Bigot's mouth, she asked if they've seen a girl around 12 years old with crimson red hair, or perhaps a boy 10 years old who is proficient with magic. But after thinking a moment, Bigot says that he hadn't. Ghislaine apologized for getting in their way, then asked where she was. Bigot, confused, said that they were in the conflict zone, specifically in the Aegean Forest, which was in the northern part of the Markian mercenary country. Ghislaine was in disbelief, and upon asking, she explained her situation. She was a bodyguard for a young girl in Asura Kingdom's Fidoa region when they were attacked. Then, suddenly, a blinding light consumed them and she found herself in a forest. After fighting hordes of monsters, which explained why they barely found any that day, she lost herself in the excitement of battle and turned into a berserker that killed anything that came near her. Now knowing where Ghislaine was, she looked up to find the sun so she could go south to return to Asura. Incidentally, where Ghislaine was headed to was in the exact direction that Bigot and his men were headed. And so he proposed they go together, and if she'd like to help out and kill the camp that's up ahead, and Ghislaine agreed. And the Bros Emperor found it suspicious that his bodyguards hadn't returned and suspected the Dikuto Kingdom of attacking them. After all, he knew that the king's main army was located near the forest, so it made sense for them to have troops within it as well. But the truth was, however, Dikuto's king was a coward and had his back to the forest, so he couldn't be caught off guard with a surprise attack. As Ghislaine, Bigot, and his men charged in, the king, seeing their armor, thought that the Bros Empire had launched a surprise attack from the forest. He then commanded his men to begin an assault on the Bros Empire and tried to shelter from the chaos. However, not 10 seconds later, Ghislaine cut him in two. The Bros Emperor had suspected an attack to come from Dikuto, but was surprised at the timing. However, they were able to keep up the fight. But that's when the Markian mercenary country came to join in their battle, making it an all-out 1v1v1. In the midst of battle, Bigot found himself surrounded, but was still alive. In what was originally a suicide mission, Bigot still wanted to cling to his life. He was alone, separated from his men. Well, he had one fighter alongside him. He trailed Ghislaine and thought to himself that he had never seen such a reliable figure before and felt so proud to be protecting her flank. At some point, Bigot could no longer see the armor of the Dikuto Kingdom soldiers and only the Bros Empire remained. However, thanks to the fact that Bigot himself was wearing the armor of a Bros soldier, the Empire thought that he and Ghislaine were on their side. But they were sorely mistaken. That was when Markian had surged in and it was then nothing but violent fighting. Not that it wasn't violent before. Eventually, Bigot had found himself separated from Ghislaine but was able to rejoin with his comrades. As he approached, they cheered for him and took their position around him. Instead of falling back, they kept pushing in the front lines. As the battle raged on, the soldiers covered in blood were slowly growing numb to reality, moving just on instinct. And that's when Bigot took an arrow to his left eye. He desperately searched for the bowman responsible. It was the Emperor of Bros. And when he found him, he was already cut in two pieces with his head falling to the ground as Ghislaine found her crimson sword's next victim. Soon the battle wore on and came to a close. Bigot survived and it was marked the victory of the Markian mercenary country. Thanks to his achievements, Bigot Mercenel was promoted to general and was celebrated as a legendary hero for succeeding a suicide mission in executing Dikuto's king. From there, Bigot Mercenel continued to do remarkable work and became one of the most outstanding great generals of the Markian mercenary country. That, however, is a story for another time. Apparently, the book says that, but I don't think we ever actually go back to Bigot. But once the battle was over, Bigot had painted his sword red and wore a necklace that had the profile of a female beastfolk chiseled onto it. They were his good luck charms, and his men began to imitate him. As to why Bigot did this, he said that he was helped by a goddess during the battle and he's following her example. It was here that the Forst Goddess Laine was created. The name Ghislaine was difficult for those in the south of the central continent to pronounce, and so, altered by their accents, they called her Laine. She appeared from the forest, rescuing the life of the great general, becoming the goddess of salvation, Forst Goddess Laine. For the next 100 years, she was worshipped as Markian's goddess of protection who provided support for many soldiers. Of course, the real Ghislaine never knew of any of this. But where did Ghislaine go after that? Was she still alive? Did she survive that battle and go home to the Asura Kingdom? Was she able to meet that precious young mistress of hers again? Did you hit that like button? Or maybe the subscribe button? Did you ring the bell for notifications? Bigot and Mercenel had no way of knowing. But I will. That sounded like a threat.